When a young woman vanished, family and friends discovered her secret life. He carried on an illicit affair with a wealthy, married man. Investigators suspected that her ex-lover was responsible, but they had little physical evidence to support their theory. In order to bring him to justice, the FBI would have to go undercover and turn brother against brother.
Everything you just heard is true, and it's about to get much stranger. June 27, 1996. A warm Thursday evening in Philadelphia. Inside an upscale restaurant near the water, a 30-year-old woman sits across from a well-dressed man 20 years older than she is. She is, by every account, one of the most organized people anyone knows. The woman who runs the calendar for the Governor of Delaware, who never forgets a name, never misses an appointment, never leaves a loose end. The man across the table is one of the most powerful attorneys in the state. To the waiter refilling their glasses, they look like any other couple at dinner. They are not. Because months before this dinner, that same woman had written 7 words in her private journal about this same man. She called him a controlling, manipulative, insecure, jealous maniac. And she was trying, quietly, carefully, and with growing fear, to get away from him. This dinner is the last time anyone ever sees Anne Marie Fahey. There will be no crime scene, no weapon, and she will never be found. But 3 years from this night, 12 people in a jury box are going to do something no jury in the history of the state of Delaware has ever done. This is the story of how they proved it, with nothing. To understand how a careful, beloved woman could vanish into thin air, and how a man who had everything nearly walked away clean, you have to go back 3 years, to a secret only a handful of people knew, and to a man who would tell everyone he loved her. He would say he'd never let her go. Remember that. He'd never let her go. Her name was Anne Marie Fahey, and at 30 she was just getting started. She'd come up through hard years and built something real for herself. A trusted job at the very center of Delaware politics, running the schedule for the governor. Warm, funny, whip-smart, meticulous. The kind of person who held everything together for everyone else. The man was Thomas Capano.
Tom Capano was extremely connected. He was, at one point, he was number 2 man for the city of Wilmington. He was head legal counsel for the governor for the state. He was very close with a number of state representatives, state senators, extremely close with some retired police chiefs for the city of Wilmington. Very influential.
Capano was Delaware royalty. He came from a wealthy, powerful family of developers. He was a partner at one of the state's most prestigious firms. He had been a state prosecutor, a city attorney, a legal advisor to governors. He was married, with 4 daughters, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. He was also, quietly, involved with several women at once. In 1993, Capano and Fahey began a secret relationship. She was 20 years younger. He was one of the most connected men in the state. From the very first day, the two of them were not standing on equal ground, and that imbalance is the thing that runs underneath this entire story. At first, he was attentive, generous, devoted even. He wrote her letters. He told her he loved her. He wanted to be close to her, all the time. That closeness had another name, and she'd figure it out too late, because the devotion curdled into something else. The attention became surveillance. The love became control. In her journal, Anne Marie stopped writing about romance and started writing about fear. That line, controlling, manipulative, insecure, jealous maniac, wasn't poetry. It was a warning she was writing to herself. She tried to end it, more than once, and every time she tried, he had a card to play. He threatened to expose the affair, to her family, to the governor's office, to everyone whose respect she'd spent years earning. For a private, careful woman with a lot to lose, that threat was a cage. But in the fall of 1995, something changed. Anne Marie met someone new, a steady, decent man named Michael Scanlon, a banker, the kind of relationship that felt like a door opening instead of closing, a real future, maybe even a proposal. She didn't tell Capano. She knew, on some level, exactly how a man like that would react to being replaced. So she kept it quiet, and she tried to slip free. Here's the question that hangs over everything that comes next. What does a powerful, obsessive man do? A man who has always gotten what he wanted, who calls it love, who says he'll never let her go, the moment he realizes she's actually leaving. Which brings us back to that dinner, June 27, 1996. The powerful man and the woman trying to escape him, at a table in Philadelphia. A waitress would later remember the mood at that table, tense, silent, the woman barely touching her food. And then, nothing. She's gone. For 2 days, silence. And for Anne Marie Fahey, silence was itself an alarm. This was a woman who confirmed plans, who returned calls, who never simply disappeared. When she missed a dinner party with her sister Kathleen, the family went to her apartment with the police. What they found didn't add up. Groceries sitting out on the counter, never put away, from a woman who put everything in its place. The apartment in disarray. An expensive new pantsuit, still in its gift box. Her purse, her wallet, her identification, all still there. Her keys were missing, and so was she.
From the information that they're providing, they said she's not the type of person to leave, go walking around the neighborhood, or to go somewhere without letting somebody know where she's at. Number one, typical with a female, when she goes somewhere, she takes her pocketbook, wallet, identification, something.
To the detective standing in that apartment, this was not a woman who had left on her own. And then, in the bedroom, her sister found two things that cracked the case open before it had even begun. A packet of love letters from a man named Thomas Capano, a man Anne Marie had never once mentioned to her family, and her journal.
The detective found Anne Marie's journal in the bedroom and flipped to the last page. The diary entry evidenced her relief at ending her love affair with Capano. It read, "I have finally brought closure to Tom Capano. What a controlling, insecure maniac."
Doesn't look like a happy relationship, though. No, not at all.
Her own voice, her own fear, in her own hand. The last entry read like a woman announcing her escape. "I have finally brought closure to Tom Capano." She thought she was free. The officers went to Capano's rented house at 3:39 in the morning, and the last person known to have seen Anne Marie alive was calm, courteous, cooperative, a lawyer's composure. Yes, he said, they'd had a relationship, long over, parted as friends. Yes, he'd taken her to dinner Thursday night. Afterwards, he'd brought her briefly back to his house to give her a gift and some groceries she needed, then dropped her safely home. He hadn't seen her since. She was moody, he suggested. She had Friday off. She'd probably turn up at work on Monday. She did not turn up on Monday. A neighbor remembered one thing, a single set of footsteps in Anne Marie's apartment that Thursday night, around 9:45, heavier than usual, possibly a man's, and then nothing, ever again. Her bank accounts went silent, her cards were never used, and investigators were left staring at the hardest kind of case there is. A woman was gone. There was no crime scene, there was no weapon. There was, quite literally, nothing to recover. Just an empty apartment, a frightened journal, and a powerful man with a tidy story and every connection in the state. On paper, it was the perfect crime. So they built the case out of the impossible. Within weeks, this stopped being a local missing persons file. The FBI stepped in, and a federal task force formed around it. The Bureau, the IRS, the ATF, the Wilmington Police. A federal grand jury would hear evidence for more than a year. When you can't find the victim, you reconstruct the truth from everything around the edges. And that is exactly what they did. They pulled the phone records, they pulled the credit cards, and one purchase stopped them cold. 2 days after Anne Marie disappeared, Thomas Capano, a man living in a rented house, spent $308 at what his credit card statement called a wallpaper warehouse. A prosecutor dialed the number on the receipt. A voice answered with 2 words, airbase. Investigators had the same sickening thought at the same time. Then the housekeeper filled in the rest. She'd cleaned Capano's house days before Anne Marie vanished, and he'd abruptly canceled her next visit. When she finally returned, weeks later, the living room love seat and carpet were simply gone. In their place, 2 chairs and a brand new rug. That was enough. On July 31st, armed with a 37-page warrant, they searched the house and went straight to the room they believed it had happened in. They moved the new furniture, and low on a baseboard, almost invisible to the naked eye, they found 2 small brown spots. The spots tested positive for blood, which mattered enormously, because at that point, it was the only physical evidence in the entire case. Now came the question everything would hinge on: was it hers? And here the case nearly collapsed, twice. To match the blood, they needed a sample of Anne Marie's, but her parents had passed years earlier, and a sibling's DNA wouldn't be precise enough. Then someone checked her calendar, and found an ordinary, generous entry from a month before she vanished. She had donated blood. Agents raced to the blood bank. Too late. Her donation had already been processed into plasma and shipped overseas. And plasma, stripped of its cells, is one of the worst possible sources of DNA on Earth. The one thing that could speak for her was on the other side of an ocean, in a form science could barely use. Meanwhile, a project manager at the Capano family's construction company came forward, terrified, with a strange detail. The Monday after Anne Marie vanished, he'd been ordered to have 4 dumpsters hauled and dumped, dumpsters that weren't even full. Investigators traced them to a landfill and spent broiling August days combing through mountains of garbage, searching for a love seat, a carpet, anything. They found nothing. No match, no furniture, no witness inside the family willing to talk, and a suspect so wealthy, so connected, that people were angry the FBI was even asking about him. For the agents standing in that landfill, it looked, for one long summer, like Thomas Capano had actually done it. The perfect crime. Then, on September 6th, the phone rang. The plasma had been intercepted, recovered just before it reached its destination in Europe.
The problem with extracting DNA from plasma is that plasma is the portion of blood that is separated from the blood cells, and the blood cells are what contain the DNA. So when you're working with plasma, you're actually working with a very poor source of DNA.
To his surprise, he found residual red blood cells in the plasma. This enabled Giusti to retrieve a small amount of Anne Marie's DNA.
The examiner's expectations were low. Plasma is what's left when the DNA-rich cells are removed. But inside that recovered bag, against the odds, he found residual cells, enough to build Anne Marie Fahey's genetic profile. He set it against the 2 brown spots from Capano's baseboard. They matched. There was only a minute chance the blood belonged to anyone else. Think about what that means. A quiet act of kindness, weeks before she vanished, became the evidence that placed her in that house on the last night of her life. She helped prove her own case. It was her last gift, to herself. But blood in a house is not a conviction. Capano was a former prosecutor with money, lawyers, and a family of multimillionaires closing ranks around him. If someone had helped him that night, investigators believed, it was someone who shared his name. The phones pointed 2 ways. One trail led to a woman named Debbie McIntyre, another mistress of some 12 years, whom Capano had called the very morning after Anne Marie disappeared. The other led to the youngest brother, Jerry Capano, who agents discovered had recently sold his fishing boat, sold it without its anchors. They suspected exactly where those anchors were, so they went after Jerry, not for the disappearance, but for a pressure point. For 11 months, undercover agents tracked his every move, and what they found gave them leverage, a firearms collection stored in the closet of his 3-year-old son, in a house where they also found narcotics. In October 1997, the FBI and ATF raided it.
We also knew he was very loyal to his brother. He almost viewed his brother as a father figure. But at the same time, he had a wife, he had children, he had a pretty good life, a life that he probably wouldn't want to give up to go to jail. And that was the card that we had to play.
Now Jerry Capano faced federal charges of his own, and a choice: his brother or his wife and children. The FBI let him sit with it. On November 8, 1997, 16 months after Anne Marie vanished, Jerry Capano walked in with his lawyer and started talking. It had begun months before she disappeared, he said. Early in 1996, Thomas came to him with a story. He was being extorted. Someone was threatening his children. He asked Jerry for cash, for protection, and, someday, maybe, for help with the boat. Jerry handed over $8,000 and thought little more of it. Until one morning that June, when he stepped outside at dawn and found his older brother parked at the end of his driveway. Thomas needed the boat. Now.
And Jerry said to Tom, "Did you do it?" And his brother said yes. Tom played the brother card. Tom said, "I have nobody else to turn to."
Jerry asked him point blank if he'd done it. Thomas said yes. Jerry wanted no part of what came next. He had a family, a home, a life. And Thomas played the only card that would work. "You're my kid brother. I have nobody else." Jerry relented. What he described was the answer to, why was she never found? A heavy cooler loaded in a garage. A drive to the marina, where 2 men carrying a fisherman's cooler down a dock drew no attention at all. And then 60 miles of open Atlantic, far enough out that no other boat would ever be close enough to see. Thomas had miscalculated. The cooler wouldn't sink, and what he did next, to make certain it never surfaced, is the part Jerry could never forget. There was one more errand that day, a couch with a large stain and a carpet, hauled to a dumpster at a construction site run by the 3rd brother, Louis. Louis soon admitted his own role. Those 4 dumpsters, emptied off schedule on his brother's orders. 2 brothers now stood against one. The FBI put Thomas under round-the-clock surveillance, and days later, watched him loading suitcases into a truck, headed toward the airport. On November 12, 1997, they arrested him before he could board anything. But prosecutors knew exactly how thin the ice was. In the entire history of Delaware, only one case had ever been tried without the victim being found, and it had ended in an acquittal. Everything rested on a brother's word and 2 spots of blood. Then the phone rang again. A fisherman had actually found the cooler, bobbing in the Atlantic, back around the 4th of July, 1996. It was damaged in ways the newspapers had never reported, which meant he couldn't have invented it. He'd assumed a shark story explained its condition, patched it up, and used it for over a year, until Capano's arrest hit the news. Agents drove out, checked it, and found the detail that changed everything: the barcode. It matched a cooler Thomas Capano had bought on his own credit card on April 22nd, 2 months before Anne Marie disappeared. It corroborated Jerry's account down to the rivets, and it proved something even darker. This had been planned and purchased months in advance. One last thread. Gun store records showed that Debbie McIntyre, the other mistress, had made a purchase 6 weeks before Anne Marie vanished. Questioned, she first spun a story. Then, facing a felony, she admitted the truth. Capano had asked her to buy it for him. The trial began on October 26, 1998, and it stopped the state cold. 12 weeks, wall-to-wall coverage. Delaware's elite, watching one of their own, tried for the most serious charge there is, with no victim ever recovered. And then Thomas Capano did the thing that sealed his fate. Against his own lawyer's advice, the former prosecutor took the stand and stayed there for 8 days. His story changed completely. After years of denials, he now admitted disposing of Anne Marie, exactly as his brother had described. But he hadn't taken her life, he insisted. His new version: that night, Debbie McIntyre had burst into the house, distraught and threatening to harm herself. And in a struggle, a terrible accident happened. Instantly. He'd covered it up, he claimed, to protect her. The cooler? That had just been a gift for his brother. The cross-examination produced a moment almost too perfect for fiction. The prosecutor confronted Capano with a case from 1976, a case Capano himself had handled as a young assistant attorney general, in which a man had disposed of a victim in a creek. At the time, young Tom Capano had been quoted saying the man would have gotten away with it, if only he'd used the Atlantic. He had written the ending to his own story 22 years before he lived it. The state's version was colder and simpler. He would not be jilted. And when it was done, he'd walked into her apartment around 9:45 that night. The single set of heavy footsteps her neighbor heard, carrying fresh groceries and the new pantsuit still in its gift box. The very things her family would find. He staged her homecoming, so the world would believe she'd made it home. On January 17, 1999, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Thomas Capano responsible, on the most serious level, and they made history doing it. It was the first time in Delaware that anyone had been convicted of a capital crime without the victim being found and without a weapon. Built from a brother's testimony, 2 spots of blood, and a cooler the ocean gave back. He was sentenced to the harshest penalty the state could impose. Years later, a court found a flaw in how that sentence had been reached and reduced it to life without any possibility of release. And in 2011, at 61, Thomas Capano was found gone in his prison cell, taking whatever remained of the full truth with him. Now go back to the promise. The man who wrote the letters. Who said he loved her? Who said he'd never let her go? In the end, that's precisely what he did. He couldn't stand to lose her, so he made sure no one else could ever have her, and that she could never simply walk out the door into the life she was reaching for. He called it love. It was possession. And never let her go turned out to be the most sinister sentence anyone ever said about Anne Marie Fahey. And yet, even with a conviction, even with a landmark verdict, there is a wound in this story that never closed. Anne Marie was never brought home. Her family got justice, but they never got her. Somewhere in the Atlantic, 60 miles from shore, is the answer to a question they've had to live with for decades. The precise truth of her final night was never fully established. No court ever determined exactly how she was taken, and the one person who knew all of it chose, to the very end, to keep it. So you can know every fact of this case, the diary, the blood, the brothers, the barcode, and still be left holding the question no verdict can answer. How does a bright, careful, deeply loved woman end up erased by a man the whole world respected? A man who insisted, right up to the end, that he loved her. How much danger can hide behind money and status and that one small, dangerous word? Think back to where we started. A dinner, a powerful man, and 7 words she had already written about him, in a diary she never imagined the world would read. She saw exactly who he was. She wrote it down. She tried to get away. They proved what he did without a weapon, without a scene, without ever finding her. The one thing they could never recover was her. If a man everyone respected could hide something this dark behind the word love, then you need to see the wife who did the very same thing from the other side of the marriage. The one who cried at her husband's funeral, in front of everyone, while the truth was standing quietly in the room the whole time. Her lover's DNA was already in the evidence. Detectives just let her keep talking. That case is on your screen right now. Tap it, and watch a perfect marriage come apart one clue at a time.